Business owners and residents in Alexandra are still battling to bridge the trust deficit. This follows days of sporadic violence and an outpouring of anger over the hardship and equality that persist in the community. This township was one of the areas in the eye of the storm during the July riots. It also shook parts of Gauteng. And this is where Veronica Makhoali is. Veronica, good morning. You almost hope with the hindsight of 3 years that the emotions, would subside a little bit more and that we'd be, it'd be a lot easier to reflect on that time. But in every story and in every retelling, particularly of people who were directly affected, it's like the events happened yesterday. And I wonder if it's similar from your location.
Absolutely, Iman. In fact, one would be forgiven if they had, of course, thought that nothing would have happened here 3 years back. As you can see, communities have come back together here where, traders continue to ply their trade. In fact, and of course, the mall, which was at the center of the July unrest here in Alexandra, when it started to build up from, as we heard from our, colleague Corinda, coming from KZN, those kind of riots, those messages coming through. And that's when we saw Gauteng being hit. This was one of the very early locations that were hit during the unrest, and we saw that the looting was taking place here at the Pan-African Mall in Alexandra, where in fact the early mornings on Saturday there was smoke billowing out of this facility, where there was a lot of chaos as well, people running in and out. And just out of the looting that happened here, it quickly then moved towards the side of the streets where traders, ordinary men and women who continue their businesses, were also affected. And right across the road was also one of the very targets of the looting and the chaos that happened. A lot of the butcheries, a lot of the local businesses here were affected. And you'd also understand that despite the fact that many of the malls were also affected, they've been able to rebuild quite faster than the others that were locally owned. And you'd also understand that for a shop to be locally owned, it means that it's owned by people who essentially are very big parts of this community. They service men and women in this area that they knew every single day. But during those fatal 2 weeks of destruction, of chaos and carnage, community members essentially became criminals for these business owners, and in fact community member turning against other community members, in a sense, of course, during the height and the peak of that destruction. These were just some of the businesses that were affected, and while it seems as though things have gotten back to normal and it's somewhat business as usual, some of the residents that we've spoken to here say the events of the July unrest has really forever changed how this community sees itself. Residents really speaking about the fact that if anything like that should happen again, they know that essentially that it will be quite difficult to rely on community members to safeguard essentially what is theirs. These were the businesses, this was the community that serviced each other essentially, and saying that what happened during the sporadic violence and the looting that also took place also left quite a sense of distrust amongst community members, saying that what they had seen, the failure by some residents to protect businesses, the failure by some residents to also protect each other, given the numbers that we saw coming out in terms of death, has also really left this community 3 years on really questioning essentially, should anything like the July unrest happen again, where do they stand as residents, how will they be able to protect each other? And we're going to be speaking a little bit more to some of the residents who are directly affected during those riots and those lootings, to get a better understanding of how they managed to move on, if they have at all. Iman.
Veronica Makhoali, live for us there in Alex, which is here in Gauteng.